Today's guest is the Housing Industry Association's Managing Director, Jocelyn Martin. Jocelyn, welcome.
Thank you. Morning.
So, to paint the picture of how you came to be the Managing Director of the Housing Industry Association, take us back to the early days and what was life like?
Yeah, well, the really early days, I think to myself, was housing always kind of somewhere in my, aspiration somewhere? Because, our family, started our family life in Canberra. I was born in the UK, but we came out as a 10-pound pom. And then, but our first home was an empty block in Canberra. And, the family home was built from there. And, even today, fairly recently, I drove past the family home and thought to myself, we really kind of built that, extended it and all that, and so, it's a very fond kind of memory of growing up on that with all the kids in the street, the new homes in the street, and so that sort of thing I think is that's where I started life. I remember my grandfather standing on it's called Mount Taylor. It's not really a mountain, a hill in Canberra overlooking what is now the Tuggeranong Valley, which is a fairly mature area of Canberra, and saying to me, Jocelyn, one day this will all be housing. And I couldn't imagine that. And so I think I have some really fond and interesting memories of housing going way back. Only recently, HIA is 80 years old this year, and recently I visited one of our prior national presidents who actually lived in my street when I was growing up.
Wow.
He's in his 90s now, and the house that he lived in, I used to look at that house and go, this is amazing. And so when I got the chance to actually visit him just this year in that house, I was so excited to just go inside that house and just look around. And so I think, when I think about it, there's probably been always that kind of interest in housing. But I did most of my schooling in Canberra, went to university in Sydney, and then kind of did the Aussie abroad thing for quite a while before returning to Canberra to work in the Hyatt Hotel in Canberra, which actually at the time was in basically derelict, and so the whole hotel was renovated. And again, I remember that time kind of going in to, be part of the opening crew of that hotel and kind of look at how it transformed from having pigeons and asbestos in the roof into the hotel that it is today. So, there's been a lot of kind of points along the way, I think, where I've kind of, been involved in that in the construction sector quite by accident.
Well, there's a few themes I can already see here in this conversation around, starting with nothing basically, and even use the Hyatt Hotel as an example where it was derelict. Yeah. And the transformative changes that you've seen, it's a good metaphor.
Yeah, that's right. We moved to Melbourne for a while, but probably another formative time was the time I spent in Tasmania. I spent a couple of years running a hotel called my husband at the time, at that time, running a hotel called the Loufra Hotel. The Loufra Hotel was originally built by Reg Ansett, who ran bus tours down to around Tasmania. But the thing about this hotel was that it had no sewerage and no water capacity.
Sounds like parts of Sydney at the moment.
Maybe. Yeah. And so it the water supply, it was fed to the hotel from a dam that was way up in the hill behind the hotel, and in order to get the pump started, we had to pay Lenny in a case of beer, who owned the property just in front of the dam and the pump. And, so I learned a lot about the fact that water just doesn't come from a tap and sewage just doesn't go somewhere else, So, it was a bit of an eye-opener for us city kids to learn a little bit more about and appreciate a little bit more about infrastructure and what it actually provided, because we had such an adventure trying to, keep the hotel running, because of the lack of infrastructure around the hotel at the time. Well, possibly still is that set up that way. But yeah. And I think at the time too, I also learned a lot about the value of community. The community around Eagle Hawk Neck, where we were in Tasmania, was sort of salt of the earth community. People earning their living through fishing and through small business. And I think you saw a lot of people just sort of banding together to help each other out. So I think that was also really valuable. And having run the pub, which was the centre for the universe for that area, yes, you learned a lot about that kind of value and support that communities can bring.
Well, even tying that in, you mentioned that your payment was a slab of beer. The beer economy is definitely alive and well in our industry still.
Yes.
But also you talk about community, and we'll touch on this when we start to dive into Housing Industry Association. But I've heard you say before, it's all well and good being digital, but human-to-human contact is so important.
Yeah. Look, I think, the residential construction, obviously a lot of people who find their way into residential construction have found, that sitting behind a desk in a bureaucratic environment is not for them. They've got they're creative. They like to work outside. They like to work with people. But that often means that they're not sitting in front of an email. They're not sitting in front of taking messages and reading things all the time. And when they need something, they actually just need to talk it through with someone. And I think that's also the case for a lot of small business. When you are, any business really, when you're running it and you don't have a peer, necessarily your peers and perhaps your competitors, you really need that kind of person just to kind of soundboard with. And I think that's really an important thing for people to know, that they can still talk to people and still, and sometimes the majority of members that call us are absolutely on the right track, absolutely know what they're talking about. They just kind of just need to hear themselves say it, because they just haven't got a sanity check. Yeah. Haven't got anybody else really, and they're just sort of trying to work it out themselves. So I think that's really important.
And coming back to your time in Tasmania, no doubt you're exposed to a lot of blue-collar workers that evidently and no doubt shaped some of your leadership ambitions and ideologies, especially working with the Housing Industry Association. Yeah.
Look, the people in Tasmania were very resourceful, and I think what if you're going to a sort of ready-made job every day with an employer, you tend to not realise what it takes to run a business and to think every day, how am I going to grow my business? How am I going to keep my business sustainable? How am I going to make sure that I pay people? Where's my next job coming from? And I think that when I see the kind of way that people in Tasmania, in our area in Tasmania, actually kind of, was so resourceful and thought about how to actually, develop opportunities for themselves, because the sort of normal structured employment opportunities weren't available in that area. That I think that really helped shape my view of the world. I think coming from Canberra, where, the largest employer, of course, is the government, and it's often expected that you leave school and that's what you do, it's a very secure way of being in the world. When you're in sort of an hour out of Hobart in an area that doesn't have, as I say, a lot of direct employment at the time, you really are meeting people that are sort of finding their own way of forming a living, and I think that probably, if without that experience, I might have just sort of failed to appreciate what it took to actually run a business, and what it took to actually constantly be thinking about how you create that business, grow the business, and sustain it.
Well, our industry is so fragmented in the sense that it's a lot of small business that are operating.
Yeah, it is, but it's a lot of small business, and it's also, but I think more importantly, that starting out is quite difficult and quite challenging and quite risky. And so I often think for people that are starting out, they're wanting to start out and grow their business now, I think they have to put a lot on the line. And I think it's probably always been the case, but I think now you have to put a lot on the line. You have to obviously be hands-on in the business, but also, do an enormous amount of paperwork, weekends and evenings as well. Eventually, if you are fortunate enough and able to make the right decisions, you'll grow that business and eventually be able to employ people that can support you, but not in the early days. Very, very hard. So I think even the businesses that would call themselves medium-sized now, or even some of the larger ones, started out that way and as small business. So, whilst it might be a hallmark of the industry, I think it always has been and always will be because of what it takes to start out in this sector and grow. And some people will be happy, operating, in a very sort of in a small way, and other people have aspirations to grow it bigger. But most of them will start off in that small business category.
And no doubt, that formative time in Tasmania when you were working, then you shifted into the education sector.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so in Tasmania in the mid-90s, the interest rates were hitting about 17.5%, and it was getting very difficult to run a tourism business in Tasmania at that time, and so it was time to go. Sadly, there wasn't a lot of other employment opportunities in Tasmania at the time. I think maybe that would have changed things if we were able to stay. But at that stage, we had a baby, 2 dogs and a grand piano. And so, getting off the island was probably ended up being one of our highest priorities. We moved back to Melbourne for a while, but then the lure of having babysitting grandparents kind of lured us back to Canberra. And I took a job working at the time, it was called the Australian International Hotel School. And that gave me, and I loved teaching, and I loved, at that stage, had really developed a real interest in running small businesses, and the financial training that I had in my undergraduate degree as well all kind of came together. The hotel school was an interesting concept because it was the first degree granting private provider in Australia. So it was a very difficult business to run. There was a lot of criticism about paying for degrees, ironically, at the time, which is not necessarily the case now. But it also had, interestingly enough, a practical component which involved a internship and externship arrangement with an employer, which now everybody is looking for, even in a degree program. But at the time, was very unusual. And I look at the students there, many of them I'm still connected with, and I think they really came out as, many of them haven't stayed in the hotel sector, but many of them have got some really well-rounded base where they've been able to go into other sectors. And but it also opened my eyes, I suppose, to the opportunities around vocational and the importance around vocational skills combined with education as well. And I thought, and that was, you could see the change in somebody who had left school with very little kind of world skills. They wouldn't agree with that, but yeah, being able to get that work experience in a kind of classroom kind of sense, and they were able to develop their sort of language with customers, their customer service skills. They were able to make mistakes without getting fired. And I think that, having that combination of, as I say, classroom and vocational training just gave everybody, all the students, this sort of well-rounded, aspect to their education, which at the time wasn't offered in the university sector, and at the time was probably almost too vocational in the vet sector. So it kind of, without the kind of substance behind it in vocational training. So I think, what I learned was just that combination of skill sets that you needed for business, and it wasn't just the technical skills, that dealing with customers, dealing with difficult situations, understanding finances, all those things became important as you kind of entered your career.
And I think, to your point around those dual skill sets, almost textbook verse on the job training in any industry, but especially ours, housing industry. We've got an estimator who has come off the tools as a carpenter. He's learning, operationally now, the detailed estimations, tendering. Yeah. But that dual component is crucially important to have a successful team, I think.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, look, a lot of people, people leave school, they don't know what they want to do. And, often people will change careers a lot of times. They won't necessarily, certainly, the idea of doing any more maths is often something that people don't want to think about too much, but inevitably they come to it if they've gone into business or they want to progress with their employer. And I think that, as long as there's this sort of thirst for learning and this kind of understanding that, I do have to kind of, I am keen to kind of learn more, and I am keen to kind of develop my business more or progress with my employer, that sometimes it just needs a little bit more time after school. But, as long as that kind of first step in the education ladder can kind of open their eyes to it, won't always solve everything right there and then. And that's where I think some of those foundation skills, both at the university and the vocation sector, perhaps we lost a bit of sight of some of that and the importance of that. And even in the school system, I think, we're very much on the curriculum bandwagon, and the curriculum is so full with subject material that some of those kind of broader skills are maybe being put aside in favour of kind of the ATAR. And, I'm on the board of a large school in Canberra, and I know that they struggle with the volume of requirements in the school sector, and trying to kind of still give that well-rounded base for young people as well.
Touching on that, you made the comment before around school education in Canberra, typically then biggest business, like you mentioned, is government, bureaucracy. So it's just almost like a given that's the career path. I think too, private schooling education very much touches on and focuses on that ATAR, as you mentioned. What can we do to change the mentality around that?
Yeah, look, it's something that I think hasn't changed enough. And in fact, I think some part of me thinks that we haven't progressed at all, actually. And I think there's still this idea, this aspiration that you go and you get a degree, and that somehow a diploma or a certificate from a vocational provider is a lesser qualification leading to lesser career prospects. There's no evidence of that. In fact, I would say, and it's hard to tell what people will do after, say, the age of 30 or so, but, in the early stages of their career, there's no evidence that that someone coming out of university with a degree will get paid more, has any more prospects than someone who is, starting their own business and or working with a trade. And so I think there's just this kind of image of what might be considered sort of almost dirty work versus a sort of white collar, physically easier work, but and that somehow university is for the cleverer kids, and that starts quite early. And in the high school, it starts with the parents, starts with the careers advisors, and it actually starts with the peer group as well. Even my kids who are only in their 20s now would refer to some of the kids as the tradie group, but they were the ones with the cars.
I was going to say they'll be the ones driving the Ram trucks or the F-150s in a few years' time, no doubt.
And, one of my son's closest friends is at the age of 25 has just bought and sold his own 2 homes already.
Wow.
So, it's it's but I think I think the school system as well, again, that ATAR, you need a certain amount of types of subjects to get the ATAR. The vocational courses don't necessarily count as much. They get dropped because, you can only have English, maths, science. Once you add those kind of things in there, there's not space to actually go and do a taster in a vocational course. And so, there's a problem with how packed the curriculum is in the first place. I think there's a lot of us and them, even in the school that I'm involved with, the vocational kids will get the last page of the annual report, it was like, oh yeah, and there were these kids, instead of, kind of being front and centre or, alongside. So, there's a lot of change that has to go on, not just structural, cultural, but I think, I think the other thing too is that business has become quite hard, and I think that a lot of, there would have been a time when people would have followed their parents into the construction industry. I think that a lot of parents who have now found business quite hard are probably actually sort of saying to their kids, don't follow me into this business. So, I think we've got some work to do to, talk up the industry, help people understand all the different career paths that they can take, and also understand the opportunities to develop your own business and so forth as well. So there's a whole lot of things that the industry can do, that schools can do, parents need to know more about.
I think too it's about actually getting in front of them, and trying to break down those barriers and the walls around the stigma of a trade or the stigma of running your own business, and showing, almost case studies where here's someone that's very successful and they started out as a plumber or an electrician or a carpenter. The Housing Industry Association do a fantastic job with that. I attended the Apprentice Awards in New South Wales last week, and there was a panel discussion. Brad Armitage was the chair, and it was great to see so many people on that panel, and I sat on that panel too, but different parts of the industry, they all started out as an apprentice, very young, and the avenues and the doors that it opened up, it's so grand, I guess use the term. The opportunities are there, but also I think it was great that we were in the room with apprentices, but I think it's also great if you're in the room with potential apprentices, school leavers, people that might be considering to go to uni because they think that's the only option.
That's right. I mean, look, I think that those kinds of things are, other school students like listening to other people's experiences. And I think the more we can do that, the more opportunities and the more chance we have of actually kind of, educating parents, educating peers and the students to actually think, oh, okay, this isn't so bad, and there's so many opportunities. But we've just partnered with MyTech to release a book that was originally written in the United States called The House That She Built. And it's it's a kid's book, just highlighting all the different types of trades and careers that you can have. And so just sort of kind of getting people used to the idea very, very, very early that, it's a worthwhile, legitimate, broad kind of, set of opportunities for people. We've also launched in conjunction with the book a website called She Builds the Future, which is a program to kind of show off, I suppose, all the different career paths targeted at women. But, I actually think it wouldn't matter. I think we've, able to show that those opportunities to everybody. Often people don't think of things like cabinet making. They don't necessarily think of, landscaping or roofing or those kinds of things. Carpentry can be the most popular, but partly I think it's sometimes because what people know about.
So it's funny, you mentioned, children follow their parents, and our site manager actually, he's got a 3-year-old son, and his son sometimes will go through his house or a finished home with him, and he'll do a mock walkthrough as a 3-year-old, talking about this is the kitchen, because he imitates his father, and Joe does a wonderful job. But I think that is very important, They're sponges. If you start talking about it at a young age, and that initiative around the children's book, I think is fantastic, because I don't think, I've got a 5-month-old. I haven't seen anything on the market. He's a bit young to be reading a construction book, but I don't think I've seen anything on the market that talks about, the normalisation of a trade. Yeah,
that's right. And I think those are the kinds of things, many years ago, I was lucky enough to visit a school in Europe where it was an early learning centre, a preschool, kinder, where it was themed in construction, and all the sort of learning that they did around basic very early kind of mathematics, I suppose, and language was all themed around construction, and the kids really related to it, but they were learning maths and English, but they were learning it in a kind of context of construction. And I thought, some of the having watched my 3 kids go through school learning almost exactly what I learned, you kind of think, we must lose a lot of kids in high school because they can't relate what they're learning in their science or physics class or their maths class to real world. And, construction has it all in that sense, and I reckon if you actually probably framed some of that high school learning in the context of construction where everybody can relate a little bit, you might find that people, especially with mathematics, engage a lot more. But so it was a really interesting experience to sort of see at a very young age how, and I don't think the same kind of stigma between tertiary and vocational education exists in Europe. I think there's a legitimate sense of pathways, equal pathways. They do seem to select them fairly early, but I think they all sort of agree that it's a very legitimate pathway, and well supported as well by the education system.
So talking now about your pathway and your career, and now let's speak specifically about the Housing Industry Association. So you came on board with the HIA in 2014.
Yeah.
What made what sparked your interest in the housing industry?
Well, I guess the first thing I was attracted to was the not-for-profit sector. I've always been quite interested in the not-for-profit sector, and quite early on I sort of said to myself, I really would like to be in the association world, because again, it was that kind of sense of community that you can build around associations. I'd been in education all that time, but sort of largely in the operations at that point there. So, I applied for a role with the HIA that looked after all their HR, IT, and governance kind of side of things, which was where my strengths were, well, my CV was at the time. And I suppose it was the association world was surprisingly everything that I hoped it would be, this sort of really strong sense of community, and, a strong sense of purpose as well. And they were the kinds of things that I was looking for, in my next step, but also with all the challenges that come from running a not-for-profit with a kind of a purpose, as opposed to, that can sometimes run contrary to financial survival. And so, but, what I liked, I suppose, about the HIA was, first of all, the fact that it's a national organisation, so it has an excellent oversight over the whole country and what's going on. But I really very quickly started to enjoy the members and enjoy what they were trying to do, and the stories that came out of the membership, from the small business success to to the volume and even multi-unit success. And I think it kind of piqued that sort of latent interest that I already had in construction. And my previous role, working in the operations side of the education sector, we had done a lot of construction, a lot of building on the site, and I really loved that. And that was, I suppose it was just more a combination of things that came together at the HIA. We also had a lot of, I suppose, modernisation to undertake. We needed to improve things like our databases and things like that. And of course, it's on the cusp of starting up, different styles of communication in terms of social media, and all those kinds of things were happening too. So it ended up being, you never know, do you, when you apply for a job, but it ended up being fantastic. And so over time, got more involved in the policy side and the commercial side, and I suppose in a way did my own apprenticeship before coming into the MD role. Did an HIA apprenticeship. Yeah.
It's now 2 years you've been in the MD chair.
Yep, almost to the day.
Yeah, not far off. What have you seen change in this landscape?
Yeah. So I think I think the first thing I would say is that within HIA, I think we have probably worked very hard to, in the last couple of years, to improve our profile. There's so many different ways to communicate with members. There's so many different ways of communicating with government. There's a lot of change in the government landscape in terms of, ministers and representatives. And so keeping up with all that is quite difficult. But, we've managed to work really hard on our communication channels and the way that we develop our profile, because I think that that's not necessarily what members value day to day, but in the kind of longer term and looking ahead, it is that influence that people expect from us. And so I think we've worked, really hard on our relationships and our advocacy over the last couple of years. I think in terms of of change in the way that our members do business. I see more and more the burden of regulation, that it is quite tough to do business. The pandemic obviously created a really strange kind of bubble, which, was very difficult to understand. And obviously businesses weren't sure whether to take advantage of things like home builder, what was happening with skills and material prices and so forth. And so during that time was very volatile. I think, coming out of that period now, I see, business really having to adjust a lot more. I think overall, I hear from our members that they're kind of managing what they've learned from the pandemic is to manage within their means and not necessarily be drawn into being crazy busy, but just to kind of make sure that they can, be sustainable. And I think ultimately that's all we ask of any government really, is to have a consistent and sustainable business environment. And one of the challenges is just this constant cycle, peaks and troughs, that make it very, very difficult for business to manage through. What hasn't changed, I think, is just, the enormous pride and the incredible hard work that goes into producing our homes. There is just so much personal skin in the game in this sector. And you can be talking about the multi-unit business through to people that build maybe 1 or 2 homes a year. There's just so much sort of personal pride in construction, in residential construction, and that impressed me at the beginning and continues to impress me. And I don't think that I would hate to see that change. I don't think it will.
Any HIA event I've been to, you can see that pride and the passion in the members that are there. It's a big industry, but it's also quite small in terms of detached housing space, project home space. You rub shoulders with the same guys typically at the same events, and everyone does get along, and you can see that pride and passion. I think there's also a lot of frustrating parts to the industry, especially when it comes down to government and red tape. The statistic on a average house and land package is $575,000 in government taxes, charges, fees. That's a considerable amount. And even when you're talking about regulation, it's almost like they need to take the old Kerry Packer approach. If you're going to bring in a new rule, repeal an old one. The NCC has grown exponentially in terms of the number of pages. So sifting through all that information now is taking up a lot of time and resource. Is there too much red tape, do you think?
Well, we definitely advocate on that basis. The difficulty, the challenge is avoiding becoming a broken record, just talking about red tape. And so we found ourselves needing to be much more clearer about what that red tape is. The amount of taxes, fees, charges, the cost of time that gets added into, the price of a new house and land package is one way of demonstrating the cost of red tape and the amount of change that could be affected if we were actually able to tackle even small parts of it. And so one of the areas that, we've targeted, I suppose, as an example of the red tape is the kind of, growth, if you like, in the National Construction Code. And that has fortunately been recently taken up by the federal government. But I think one of the reasons that it has become broadly harder is because we've allowed new homes to become the kind of portal, if you like, for all stakeholder interests, the answer to everything. the answer to energy efficiency, the answer to accessibility, the answer to insurance woes. And that means that code, being the only kind of rule book or tool, actually becomes the repository or tries to provide the answers for all those things, when in actual fact the kind of core purpose of it is around quality, safety for the person that lives in the home, but not be the answer to climate change. And we only build 170,000 dwellings a year, can't possibly be the answer to climate change. But I think the amount of stakeholders that are trying to influence the sector through the use of the code has meant that it's become more and more, it's become harder, and it's delivering diminishing returns for those changes as well. So I think in recent weeks, it's one of the reasons why the federal government have honed in on kind of trying to reduce the pace at which that code changes. The federal government don't have that many levers to pull, but that is one of them. And the ABCB, which govern the code, are funded as part of an intergovernment agreement, HIA, and that means that the states are very much a part of developing that code, which is not the case for a lot of other things. So I think it's probably an area where we have probably the most opportunity for change. But it's not the only thing that needs to be done, but it is probably one of the areas that could be influenced at state and federal level.
Well, and the National Construction Code, that's not going to free up land, is it?
No.
And before we started rolling the cameras and recording today, we spoke about productivity. And what I find, I shake my head quite regularly at the fact, it's 20 years from rezoning to shovel-ready land. Productivity perspective, there's 2 or 3 occasions throughout that journey and life cycle that you need to have a report written at rezoning stage. For example, we're in Marsden Park right now. A flood study needed to be conducted at that rezoning level. There's 4 or 5 major developers who have taken significant parcels of land. Each of those entities then had to rewrite a flood study. You can see where I'm going here. Then at the build level, part of the requirement is a flood study or a reference that we're not in a flood-prone block of land, which has already been addressed 15 years ago by state government. So from a productivity perspective, there's so many times where you're just paying money and all these fees and charges, it's the government or those levies, the councils, they're clipping the ticket potentially 3 times on some occasions.
Yeah. Well, probably the number one message is that we don't just have a housing crisis in this country, we have a land crisis. And, I think the first thing I would say is that there's this sort of idea that, greenfield is not the answer and that infill is the answer, or modular housing somehow is going to be the answer. So there's this kind of constant distraction, if you like, by sort of saying, well, it's not the answer anyway, so we don't have to do anything about it. Whereas no matter what you are talking about, whether it be modular housing, whether it be infill or greenfield, it still requires the same kind of level of investment, the same kind of frustrations around planning, the same challenges around infrastructure delivery. And actually, in the end, bizarrely, greenfield ends up being a more efficient way to deliver housing. And I say bizarrely because it still takes such a long time, as you said. And that's why we are kind of, at the very, we use terms like one house, one approval, truth in zoning. So, something that is, is zoned for housing, end of story. You know, we don't have to keep going back around. And that's really how it should, how the system should work. But it doesn't, as you pointed out. It kind of, every man and his dog needs to have a little bit of a say. And I think some of that comes back to, you know, this kind of almost intense need to somehow manage a risk that doesn't actually even exist, you know, around flood warnings and flood-prone places and bushfire zones and so forth. You know, that is, you know, all performed by algorithms on someone's desktop, not necessarily actually, you know, by witnessing a flood. And so, you know, it's, yes, but I think what's driving it is this incredible kind of risk averseness, and you know, not having a kind of, I mean, the Productivity Commission Chair Danielle Wood referred to it a couple of weeks ago as a growth mindset. So everything is about kind of putting a lid on things and making sure that people's butts are covered, instead of actually saying, you know, what's the worst that can happen here? Let's get on with it. And if the Productivity Commission Chair is saying that's the kind of mindset that we need to have at least a bit of, then, you know, it might just change the way we kind of bring in some of these regulations or enforce some of these regulations. And, you know, someone might be brave enough to say, you know what, we'll rely on that previous study. But you know, she said, oh, you know, we should have a growth mindset at the heart of everything we do. And we say, well, just, you know, put in every government department, make housing affordability, you know, at the centre of everything that they think of. And perhaps some of those decisions that they make might actually, on balance, not, you know, they might kind of work out that they don't need to do them. But, you know, I think the government systems, departments, you know, have grown so much that everybody is kind of racing around justifying their own jobs half the time. And how do you break that down?
Yeah. It
becomes very, very difficult. You know, the federal government talk a little bit about, or they get asked about incentivising the states. You know, the housing minister's response to that is, at some point the states have got to want to do this. They've got to do their job. And it's true. You know, you look around where we are in Marsden Park, and it's an amazing developing community. And, you know, it's the very thing that a lot of people would have said, you know, many years ago, why would you want to live here? But you look around now and it's just a beautiful community of, and with all the facilities that you need. And so I think, I think, you know, having that kind of growth mindset and that value that can be brought by developing these kinds of communities is where everybody's head needs to go. But you know, I think even in the infill argument, you have, you know, challenges around, you know, sort of NIMBY kind of culture. You know, yes, we need to build more apartments, but just not in our suburb. But you've got the same challenges with infrastructure delivery, infrastructure upgrades. And so, you know, it's the same but different.
Well, even, you know, you talk about that infill development. A lot of the time now, especially with the introduction of the transport-orientated development, the TOD, which is the new housing code in New South Wales, the feasibility studies, that the numbers don't stack up.
That's right.
So I think, to your point, you know, greenfield land, it can be affordable. You know, even a housing crisis, it's a land crisis, really. So changing that mindset. Here's the question. 1.2 million homes have to be built across Australia up by 2029. 377,000 of those homes is in New South Wales.
Yeah.
Out of that, and you spoke about modular and social housing, which is very important, 2,200 homes need to be refurbed, renovated from social housing, and then 6,200 new homes. They are talking a lot about modular housing, but that works out to be about 2% of the total number.
Yeah.
So coming back to the 1.2 as an overall figure, are we going to get there?
So I think the first thing that I would say is that it's been really, really helpful and important to have a target. And I think that has actually helped put the issues that the industry that's holding the industry back on the table. It's put it high on the agenda for every single politician. And so, I think we would say at HIA that we're very supportive of having a target. It's been really important, and it's really been handy to have an ambitious target because it is the number, in fact, probably more, it's the number we need for a growing population. So there's no denying that should be the target. And I think, and surprisingly, there's been times when I've felt, at any moment now they're going to drop the target because we're not making it, and they're just going to bury it and pretend it never existed. And that would be really unfortunate. So we're not going to make the target, I wouldn't have thought. However, are we going to actually make a lot of changes that make it potentially better to deliver more homes in the future? Absolutely. And I see that happening all around the place. Every state has different TODs and HDAs and I don't know, their versions of those kind of things. However, you see it in every state where they're really consciously now trying to figure out this problem. And I think that the target has been really important part of that. So, it is a common question to ask, about whether we're going to make it. Certainly the apartment sector is where probably the real volume needs to kind of kick in. But as you said, it's not stacking up in places like Sydney and Melbourne at the moment financially to get an apartment off a block off the ground. They need pre-sales and investment from foreign investment often, and that's what they've had in the past. And that's not available at the moment to them. And so I think, doing the figures means that it's just not financially viable. No one would be interested in a 1-bedroom, $2 million unit, which is what they would have to sell it for. So I think that's where the volume really, really needs to pick up. But in the meantime, the greenfield can be actually, go a long way to kind of towards that target and towards trying to get close to that target.
So I guess, and it's a minefield now trying to work out policy and getting to that target, because it's not only about price of land, price of housing, but then it's also getting them built.
Yes.
So, we need skilled labour. The government just came out, or they've announced a $78 million initiative around trade skilled shortages.
Yeah.
Talk to me a bit about that.
Yeah. So the federal government, there is a number of things that they are doing around fee-free TAFE and around supporting apprentices. I think at the moment, we would say that many of the builders are building within their means. They're building according to the demand that they're having, and the demand is not coming through the door to sort of warrant increasing their volume. And so, funnily enough, in Sydney and Melbourne, we're not necessarily seeing the demand for trades that, we end up talking about. So we're kind of saying, but if you want to build 1.2 million homes, if you want to have the Olympics in Brisbane, you are actually going to have to really start investing in trades now. You're going to have to invest in apprenticeships. You're going to need to recognise the role that employers play in training on the job. That's the nature of an apprenticeship. So you've got to recognise the time that an employer will take out of their daily lives to invest in training, on the job training for an apprentice. And you've also got to kind of recognise attract skilled migrants into the country as well, with expedited visas, recognition of their qualifications. All those things are very slow at the moment, and people who are looking to move overseas for work have got choices. And if Australia is too slow, too far away, too expensive, they're not getting their skills recognised, they're not going to come here. And so there are some good schemes. There's some good schemes in Western Australia, and, you know, some where they're bringing skilled migrants over to Western Australia. And I think there's a scheme in South Australia, but they're small. They're not widespread. So I think the government federal government need to do a lot more. I suppose, to be fair, they've probably got the care economy in their ear too, and a whole lot of other competing sectors too. But they haven't declared they're going to build 1.2 million homes in those sectors. So, and if those people come, they need somewhere to live.
That's right.
Look, the residential sector is competing as well with the bigger end of town, infrastructure as well. And I was at a conference the other day where they were talking about, the Olympics in Brisbane. The amount of work that's going to go on in southeast Queensland is just extraordinary, or need to be extraordinary. It hasn't started yet, but that is going to actually suck a lot of the trades out of the southern states in particular, to move there to work on, and promise of quite significant money. So it's going to be harder to and they're not going to be building homes either. They're going to be building stadiums and swimming pools and all sorts of things. So so I don't know who's going to build the homes if they don't actually really hone in on this.
Well, I think too in New South Wales, Tim Reardon, Chief Economist at HIA, he'll speak at the Outlook breakfast and talk about trade availability is still quite strong, but we are still at the bottom of the cycle.
That's right.
So as it starts to ramp up, all I can see is dollar signs. Operating a business, I'm thinking, okay, with this shortage, and good luck to them, they're going to take advantage of it. They're going to be very much in demand, and it'll almost be like a Dutch auction to try and get them to actually pick your site to work on.
That's right, and that's the point at the moment. I think where as interest rates drop and the new 5% first homeowners guarantee kicks in, and a few other things align on the supply side, businesses will be in a position to grow again, and they will be in a position to start delivering more homes. But if they do, they won't have the skilled labour. And we see that in Western Australia where, they didn't have the they've remained fairly steady through the pandemic, and their biggest constraint is skilled labour, and that will happen here on the East Coast. Well, it probably already is, but it will start to happen, and that will drive the cost up, will cause delays. There is a question the government asks us about, well, then you'll need to innovate more, more modular components and those kinds of things. Is this sort of feeling that I think that maybe the industry will adjust by having different methods of construction. And that's probably where the modular idea becomes they get persuaded a little bit more about the modular idea because they think it's all going to happen in a factory. So why would you need more trades on site, which is a very limited and simplistic view of the ability to deliver modular construction.
Well, you need the factory space. So, there's a perfect example. Go out and find the factory where you can actually build these things.
Yeah, you need a factory space. You need you need to put that factory in the right place, and you need you need consistency of supply into the future if you're making that kind of investment. So it's not the answer to everything. It's an answer, but certainly modular components is probably there's probably more scope there to start using some of that, using more of that. But even that, takes a long time for the manufacturers to bring products to market. because it takes a long time for those to get approved too. So
there's a consistent theme in this conversation, unfortunately, without beating government up too much. But it does, we talk about red tape and timeframes. It's whether it's land, like you're saying, getting a patent approved even.
That's right. Yeah.
With your role now as the Managing Director of the Housing Industry Association, what's your long-term view and what do you hope to achieve, let's say in the next 5 and 10 years?
Yeah, so I guess, there's in the broad sense of the advocacy space, I think we obviously, it'll be interesting to see what happens. This federal government obviously are here for this term and probably the next term. That means that the Liberal Party at the moment are kind of missing in action, rebuilding. That there's a role there for HIA really to almost act as an opposition and a really strong advocate to be very kind of direct with government in that. And I think I see that as being a significant opportunity for us, for the sector in the next few years to make some really big differences. Government are very slow, they're not coordinated, they've got one eye constantly on the kind of announcements side of things. What are we going to say about this as opposed to making meaningful change? And I think, but there's an opportunity for HIA to be right at the coalface there and try and get some really meaningful changes happening. And that will flow through to the state level. In terms of our member services, I think like a lot of businesses worldwide, developing digital capability has been a priority over the last few years. However, I think one of the things that we need to recognise is that the nature of the industry is, you're driving here, driving from one place to the other, you're making phone calls, you're not sitting at a computer. You really need that kind of support. HIA is essentially the business and risk partner for industry players, and I think we really need to ensure that we are in a face-to-face sense, and I don't mean coming out on site necessarily, but available to members when they need to be able to talk to us. It's very, very difficult to run a business these days. And I think, in the next 5 years, I really want to work hard on getting back to some basics, getting out, making sure that all HIA staff that are able to get out on site, get to talk to people more, engage much more with the member and understand really what's going in the industry. I think the danger for all business of the kind of digital revolution is that you kind of retreat behind the website and behind the social media, and you kind of you become a bit generic and lose a bit of connection. I also think that we need to recognise that a lot of our builders and our members are in regional areas as well. It's quite relatively easy for us to connect with members that are in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, but, Western New South Wales, Country Victoria, there's a lot of activity going on in those areas, and I think we need to be much more conscious of that. We are amping up our professional learning. I want the sector to be, I bristle at the idea that people consider the sector to be dodgy or unprofessional in any way. It's really important for us to show, to help members find a sort of professional pride. And I think it's insulting to think that people work so hard in their business only to be kind of labelled. And so we're working very hard on our short course professional learning, making that much more accessible to people, easy to do, so that they can kind of make sure that they're up to speed and kind of protect ourselves and protect the sector a little bit more from some of those kind of disparaging kind of labels that the sector get. The media themselves love a good negative story, and, you know, being out there to sort of be able to say, no, you know, these are our award winners. This is the showcase of the kind of work we do. This is the kind of professional learning that people can undertake. You know, this is the kind of, you know, risk that the business is experiencing. They're carrying the bulk of the project. They're carrying the bulk of the cash flow. And that's tough. And, you know, so it's not mismanagement. It's actually the model of the business is very, very difficult. And so, you know, trying to kind of get confidence back in the industry and pride, you know, out there as a main message as well. I don't expect a Labor government in any state or federally to kind of focus on small business or any kind of business for that matter. They're very much worker-centric. And so, you know, trying to kind of shake the Liberal Party into action to kind of start talking a lot more about support for business and the impact of things on business would really help too, because I think overall we seem to have lost sight. We seem to be building a massive government machine that seems to be ignoring the value of business, and so, you know, trying to kind of you know, get that message out there is really important as well.
Well, to your point as well, you know, business employs the worker.
Yes. And I think because we've almost kind of created this evil persona of business, you know, and refer to big mining giants and airlines and so forth as business, and yet, you know, the majority of business is not that. It's hardworking people that employ a lot of people, and, you know, in the construction industry, obviously producing things here at home, there's not many other ways you can do it. And so, unlike a lot of things which are able to be produced by other countries or offshore, we're not that. And so, the multiplier effect of the construction industry, where people are buying, you know, using local labour, using local businesses, buying things to furnish their homes, all those things is just an extremely valuable contribution to the country. And I think, you know, it's up to us, I believe, to get out there and peddle that message as hard as we can. You know, I think the industry itself has a bit of work to do around attracting women to the sector. I think we can't rely on government just for government programs and so forth. I think when we've got a sector that really only attracts 50% of the population, we've kind of got to take a look at ourselves. And so, you know, thinking about ways that we can compete against working from home and flexible working arrangements and those kinds of things, so that, you know, we can help people understand that those things are available and sort of break free from some of the traditions, so that we can start attracting more women to the sector. Residential sector for women is a lovely sector because it so much creativity, client contact. You know, it's not. It's very different to the multi-unit sector where you're kind of showing up and building, being part of a massive team. It's like really, really rewarding to see those people move into their home and enjoy that home. And I think that's, you know, quite attractive concept to women, I think.
Absolutely. And even looking at it from a trade base, you know, again, HIA Apprentice Awards, 2 or 3 of the award winners were female, which was so amazing to see how far it's come, just even in the last couple of years. Yeah. They're so well spoken. You know, I heard, you know, some of the judges speaking with the winners, and I'm sitting there and I'm astounded, you know, that whole change that's come about and the advocacy work that HIA have done. You know, it's a credit to you guys, but it's amazing that part of the workforce now is, you know, or that industry, females are now considering not just coming into the office, taking a job in selections or interior design or, you know, planning and coordination, but more on-site work. I think it's fantastic to see.
Yeah. And it's all available. I mean, it was the same in Victoria at the Victorian Apprentice Awards as well. There were a number of finalists who were women, and I think that's the first time. HIA just kicking off a new national committee, which we're calling the Next Gen Committee. We have HIA have a significant policy development process that is developed in the regions and kind of feeds up to our national policy position. And we also treat our kind of service offerings the same way. So we have a national committee around training, around technical and planning, and we've just about to kick off our Next Gen Committee, which is for the younger people. We're sort of not putting an age on it, but younger people who are just starting out in the sector. That committee will be chaired by one of our previous apprentices of the year, female, and we will bring together representatives from each state to kind of not just advocate, but to help us recognise what it is that we need to do to attract people and retain people in the sector as well, but also to connect with each other. Because I think, like I said before, starting off your business and running a small business can be quite isolating. And one of the things that HIA has done over its 80 years is kind of had social events, and people would come to meetings and network in that way. These days, people aren't doing as much of that. So I think they're unfortunately kind of missing out on kind of connecting with their peers in the same way. So this kind of network, it goes beyond this, social media networks and so forth, which are kind of can be a bit superficial, is actually, to generate a professional network for those people who are just sort of finishing off their apprenticeship and wondering what to do next.
You've got a huge portfolio and topics to cover off in your tenure. How do you switch off, and what do you do to switch off?
Yeah, well, I'm a massive vegetable gardener, but also we run a wine business. So it's helpful because, first of all, it's wine that helps on Friday nights. But secondly, it's pretty much in complete contrast with what I do day to day. I mean, my husband and I joke because he hardly talks to anybody all day, and I talk all day. But being out there on a property, in amongst all the gardening and so forth is a complete switch off for me. But also being able to kind of be involved in another kind of development of a business has also been quite rewarding as well.
So Ravensworth Wines in Murrumbateman?
Yes, that's right.
How long have you been there for?
So we kicked off Ravensworth in about 2000. So it's about 25 years. We've been our first vintages. And look, the interesting thing, my husband actually started food writing, and so the really important part of the wine has been, its connection with food, and that's why I think we've developed a lot of Italian varieties, but also what we call natural wines, which is in the winemaking process, a limited intervention, and also in the vineyard, very few sort of sprays and, no sprays or pesticides or anything like that. And I think that's been appealing to quite a younger, less traditional market. And so now the wine is sold nationally and a few international markets as well. But the interesting thing, and the label itself has actually got a very kind of, some might say, graphic kind of food depiction on the labels. But yeah, it's always been really, really related to the food side of things as well.
And your produce You mentioned before we started rolling the cameras that you're now famous in
I'm not famous.
A restaurant in Paddington.
The gardening has now got completely out of control. We are fermenting and preserving, and I think we made something like 150 different jars of tomatoes this year. Which my husband won't give away because he doesn't want to lose the jars, because the jars are quite hard to find. But last year, one of my biggest achievements was having one of my pumpkins served in a restaurant in Paddington. I think, again, you see that kind of, growth of something, that kind of evolution of something is really, really rewarding. I suppose it's led us in a direction now where the whole property has evolved around being more sustainable. When we moved out to our home, it was just a simple kit home, and over the years we've added a lot of things to it. It now has double glazing, different lights, plenty of solar, and EnviroCycle. So there's been a lot of other things that we have kind of, so the vegetables and even the wine, which is, we built a straw bale cellar for the wine, which actually has a temperature, consistent temperature throughout the year. All those things have kind of shaped our thinking about sustainable features in property and home as well. So it's, taken us on that journey, which we're still on. And I don't think it's going to stop anytime soon.
There's probably an element too around that sustainability, how it's focusing and shaping your views on housing policy too, no doubt.
I think in reflection, it actually is, one of the, I suppose the dilemmas is, to what extent we actually kind of impose cost and in new homes now to improve perhaps energy efficiency, to address some of the climate change concerns, and how do we actually play that off against affordability? And I look at our journey and I think we couldn't have afforded a lot of those things at the beginning, but we have had a goal to kind of add them as we go, and we've been able to do that. And I often think these days for people who are starting out with a home, to what extent they perhaps are not necessarily able to have that choice of kind of adding things later and improving their home, and that, how important it is that people get into their home in the first place and can afford it and get started, get their family started, get a safe and secure place to build their careers. If we make the homes too gold-plated, is there a chance that they're not able to do those other things that are important to life?
We're using your pumpkin as a metaphor. It started with a seed, so
it did, a very small seed, not a very large pumpkin. That's right. And so I think I often wonder about that kind of balance. I recognise that it is important to set an agenda for energy efficiency. And we're not, there is no intention for, us as HIA to stand in that way, but we want a measured and sensible discussion about it. We want to make sure that it's not at the expense of affordability, and that it is actually something that is going to actually make a difference. And I think we've kind of maybe had a bit more some zealousness around that has maybe lost sight of some of those things. And that's why, taking a good hard look at how the code is developed becomes really important.
I've left the last question, or the best question, till last. Probably for me most important. What's this year's harvest looking like at Ravensworth?
Well, look, we had a couple of tough years a few years ago. During the pandemic, we were affected by smoke taint. In 2019, the bushfires all around Canberra, the smoke hung around for a long time all over the Christmas period. And when you have smoke taint in grapes, it develops in the bottle and then in the glass later, and it smells like an ashtray.
Right.
So it's not something once you have it in the grapes, you can do away with. That said, it works okay to develop beer, which we did that year.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. And just, you mentioned your weekends are pretty full. I don't know when you have time to sleep with your agenda, both on housing policy and your agricultural arm of what you like to do.
Well, 2 weekends ago, I was in my overalls weeding and on the phone to the housing minister at the same time. So when they were talking about introducing or announcing their policies around NCC and the EPBC backlog, and so I'm sitting out there and I'm thinking, I wonder if you could see me now. I got my hair up and I was like, I'm in my overalls and my boots.
That's the ultimate.
And talking to the minister's office. And there was a couple of times when that happened. I was talking to Michael Suker, who was at the time the opposition housing spokesman in the lead up to the election, in exactly the same kind of situation one Sunday afternoon, and thinking to myself, lucky this isn't a video call. But so, sometimes you can combine things hopefully you don't have to, because the idea is, you switch off on that time. But they do overlap sometimes.
Well, Jocelyn, great to chat with you today. Mm-hmm. All about housing policy. You got time as Managing Director of Housing Industry Association, but also getting an understanding of where you've come from and a bit about your private life. So appreciate that, and wishing you all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.